Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I'll clear up one of the most infamous sentences of post-Jungian commentary, or what claims to be post-Jungian commentary, namely Jordan Peterson's notion of cleaning up your room, or clean up your room, and what that means in the Jungian paradigm, or from a Jungian standpoint, a Jungian interpretation of that notion. In general, that's the sort of the specific teaser. In general, what we'll be discussing obviously is what it means to find out about yourself, to learn about yourself, and to willingly encounter yourself, to willingly delve into sort of the basement that you have built over time, let's say. And yeah, that will be the topic for today. If you like the videos on this channel, do consider to hit subscribe and also like this video. And of course, if you have questions, comments, or remarks, then please leave a comment in the video. I'll try to get back to every comment. Maybe I won't succeed, but I'll try. Okay, let's get right into it. So, Peterson, of course, is a figure that claims to be Jungian. He's certainly well read in Jung, I have no doubt about that. And although his ideas do diverge to some extent from my own interpretations of Jung's work, I do think that some of what he says, especially the conceptions about mythology, are a valuable or an interesting addition to sort of the Jungian canon. I do not think he specifically or in-depth interacts with the actual sort of meat of Jung's ideas, the problems of synchronicity, the actual metaphysical problems of the Jungian paradigms, the whole complex theory. He's just not being technical, but I do think that's because, to some degree, it's because of his audience, and then and because of his background. He's a psychologist, not a philosopher, and so you read the work that you encounter with that background in mind. And I think now there's lots to be said about Peterson in general, but I think his recent career advances, let's say, have taken him off the road that he's been embarked on previously, which was building solid theories, and that sort of moved towards sort of creating reach and creating a platform for an audience to interact, to see and watch him interact with certainly interesting people, but then in the end they don't have much to do with the advancement of theory, in that the theory in particular that he was pursuing previously. If you look at his earlier works on maps of meaning, and in his maps of meaning lectures, and then the earlier biblical series as well, that was still sort of in-depth interaction with material and with a problematic, although it was sometimes tangential, to put it lightly. It was not always structured, let's say. And again, it was, in terms of the Jungian value, the value as Jungian commentary, I don't think it was particularly Jungian, but definitely inspired by Jung. And so one of his sort of most infamous statements, of course, is, you should clean up your room. And I think, it's been ridiculed all over the internet, I guess, but here's the interesting thing. I think it does have, as most of the stuff, and we'll be talking about other elements of his theories or of his commentary in other videos, perhaps. If that's interesting to you, do leave a comment, and I'll do that. And whatever you think would be interesting to comment on from a Jungian standpoint, I'll be happy to do that, or try that, attempt that. Like, what do I know? Like, others will say I'm not Jungian enough, perhaps. But the idea here is really that there is a grain of Jungian truth, let's say, in his commentaries. Okay, and so here's what I think is at the bottom of the idea that one should clean up their room. Okay, or we should all clean up our rooms. My room being, of course, my room's very clean. Okay, so there's of course a superficial element of you should have your life in order for chaos to sort of not emerge. Okay, well, that's one element, and I think that functions on the level of the ego. It functions on the level of the linearity that you build about yourself, the sort of the ideas you have of who you are, the narrative you build about yourself. Okay, so that's the sort of the kinds of things you organize in your room, in your house, let's say, to make it a bit more complex, the places they inhabit, the way they interact with each other. Baudrillard calls it the atmosphere that you create with objects or furniture. Sorry, you create a certain scape, a certain landscape, a certain atmosphere. I would say it's a good example. And of course, you always try to imitate certain other atmospheres. Like you always whenever you organize furniture, you always in reference to something else. And additionally, you omit certain certain elements. So if we, for example, think that the way we organize our room is an extension of the way we are, as some do believe, like Baudrillard says that as well, or comments on that as well, I do think that there's something missing, because precisely what you do when you organize your room is probably what you're not, or elements of it you're not, because if anything, the act of organizing is a conscious act. Again, that's also why I said it's on the level of functions, on the level of the ego, and we're not conscious, we're not ego beings. It's precisely that's precisely the Jungian paradigm, right? That we're not, and the psychoanalytic paradigm in more general, but specifically the Jungian paradigm, that the ego is sort of this linearity that actually works against or works as a fictional layer on top of whatever is below that, which is the complexes, and then further below it, the collective unconscious. And now that's the level of organizing, right? So assembling elements, putting stuff in places, and so on and so forth. Now comes the element of cleaning up, right? So you have a dirty room and you clean it up, and preferably you have a dirty basement, let's say. That would be great if you had a dirty basement. It's much more productive, to clean up. So what happens when you're organizing and you're cleaning up actively, is with a certain vision in mind, you will want to create a certain atmosphere. Okay, well, that's conscious, but then you have to interact with all the stuff that's there. And the stuff that's there can be an externalized representation of what you actually are. It's like all the debris that exists around you. So it's like, the trash you haven't taken out for weeks and weeks. The kind of the books you've collected in your childhood that you kind of forgot about, that you never wanted to remember, vampire novels and all that kind of stuff. It's like I had an acquaintance that would put their books the opposite way. So like they would put their books in, the way you put a book in a shelf is like this, right? For reasons we can discuss another time, but obviously you want to show up the titles, right? Or you're at least not ashamed of the titles. You want to enable people to sort of see whatever you've read, right? But she would put her books like this. And it would always strike me. I was like, this is an interesting design intervention. I come to her house and I'd be like, wow, actually this is really cool. Like it looks really interesting, and I'd be very naive. And then one day I was told, like, oh, this is because if you looked at the books, if you just walk in and you see the back of the book, the front of the book, this would be, you think, oh, this could, you project all kinds of things on it. You think, oh yeah, she's actually this intellectual, curious person who has all these books, and I'm sure they're all theory, and the world would be, as always, your vessel for projection, right? It would just be, you just project onto the world. But what actually happened, what's the truth behind it, right, is that all these books were, kind of vampire novels or love novels from when she was 10 or maybe 20, right? But she was still reading them. And this is actually really funny, And so what happens when you clean up is you engage with all of this, old clothing, you actually realize, oh, none of this fits anymore. What happened to me? You realize, what was going on with me, that I was wearing these jackets, these shirts, whatever, And so it's a certain, you delve into you delve one level deeper, let's say, than your ego allows you to when your room is always perfectly organized. You know, my room here, I always try to keep it, this office at least, I try to keep it perfectly organized. And so whenever I walk in, it's like, you know, everything's in order. I immediately, I'm set into the atmosphere that I'm in here. I have, with all the history that it has, but it's sort of, the history is shielded by the organizational structure. And then sometimes I have a little, you know, chest of drawers here, and whenever I open the drawers, it's like, oh my God, there's like letters from a year ago that I don't have to answer. You know, of course, I always answer my letters, and that's part of what Peterson refers to, clean up your room. It's like, you know, you don't want the tax collector to stand in front of your door after 2 years of not paying taxes, or at least you want to be prepared when they do. I think that's the basic argument he's making, right? But then you find those letters. You know, I recently found love letters I had written, you know, 15 years ago. Well, not 15 years ago, but 10 years ago, at least. You know, judging from the cheesiness, and this is profound, right? This is amazing, because what happens actually on the Jungian level is you have these. The level below the ego is the level of sort of the collective conscious, where you have where I call it the collective conscious, where you have the complexes that are unconscious, but then collective on the level of consciousness, because they've been created in interaction with others, and that's sort of where depth occurs, right? And I made a video on depth. You can watch it here. I'll put the link here, and if you have questions, I can make another video on it and explain specific things. Please leave a comment, and also please like the video. You know, I had to drop it in somewhere. If you like this video, please like this video. Manifest your like. But you delve into this level of the complexes, right? The indebtedness that you have with others, right? Because by virtue of your ego being built as a linearity on the history that you've been, to projecting that into the future. Even if you don't know about that history, that's what you are, right? And it goes deeper, right? That's that level, right? The level of the complexes. But then one level further, the problems we encounter are suddenly, you get to the basement. You know, in Jung's vision, Jung had this dream where he was sure he had to sort of, it's this famous dream in his, or section in his autobiography, where he talks about this dream he had, where he was in his house, and he was in the sort of the ground floor, and everything was kind of normal. Then he went into the basement, and it was kind of like already getting a bit strange. It was kind of like Roman-ish, I think, and then he went deeper, and it was sort of a Greek-ish, I think, or Babylonic or whatever sort of architecture. And he went another stair downstairs, and suddenly he was in a cave, and it was like the sort of the caveman kind of vibe, and cave drawings on the walls and everything. And basically, I think one of the levels further up was also his room from his childhood, maybe. So, and that's essentially what it is, right? You clean up your room. I clean up my room here, then I go down the stairs. I have to clean up the room from when I was a child, and then you go a level deeper and you clean up the room from when your parents were children, and you go a level deeper and you actually realize, oh my God, here's this room. My family personally, they fled from Prussia 100 years, no, probably not 100 years ago, but something like that, and 80 years ago, whatever. And so you have to clean up their room some 1,000 kilometers away, thousands of kilometers away, and then you go a level deeper, and suddenly you're in the Stone Age, and you have to clean up those rooms too. And basically what that just means is you organize them according to a certain structure. You explore them and try to weave the material you encounter into the linearity that you've created as your ego, right? Because in the first instance, your ego is simply built as a fictional representation, as a fictional projection of your present into the future. And that's very insufficient, right? And that's precisely the reason why ruptures occur, why the ego is so vulnerable and fragile, and why we get snappy, and why we get sort of angry and anxious and all that, is because you don't have this, in Jung's theory at least, you don't have this connection to everything you have been, so to the complexes, and then everything that humanity always has been, this eternal drama of humanity, of being human, right? This is what Peterson says also sometimes. He says, if you don't understand that you could have been a dart in Auschwitz, then you haven't understood your unconscious. And what he means, of course, is not that you could have been that guard. I mean, but he means that the history of humanity has produced that kind of evil. And you, by virtue of having this basement, having the history of humanity in your basement, as your basement, that evil is part of you. And so you have to understand, part of cleaning up your room is precisely that, right? But it starts at the first level, right? It starts at the level of your own room, your own bedroom, office, dorm, whatever it is, And I think this is quite fascinating because Jung opens this quest that's a lifelong quest. I mean, this is the quest of individuation, right? Ultimately, to some extent, because you can only do this alone to a very limited extent, because you don't know. It's like you don't see the dust, right? You don't see the trash in your room. You think, because you're always under the gaze of the ego and its interpretation of the situation, like I will walk through my room and I think this is really clean, like until a while ago I had my books, I had them like this, right here, like kind of like this. And then at some point, someone came in and said to me, your books look kind of disorganized. They look kind of like disoriented. And I said, no, I mean, I think they look quite neat when they're like pulled out like that. And they said, no, it like looks really weird. And I sort of ignored them for like a couple of months. And then at some point I just started pushing them back. I was like, actually it was right. They look kind of disorganized. So I didn't see the dust until a certain point. It's a very simple example, but I did talk about debt elsewhere. And again, like I'll link the video again. Watch the video. But the point is that each aspect of your complexes, so each piece of information within your complexes that are not conscious, is indexed by someone else. And by virtue of this connection that I refer to as debt, you can only learn about these complexes really in a moment in which they're ruptured. You can only see them because otherwise they wouldn't be unconscious, right? You have a difficult time consciously recalling them. Right, and in that moment, when they're ruptured by someone else, so when someone tells you when someone that you always thought loved you tells you, I never did, what the hell are you crazy? In that moment, and you believe them, and it hits home, when you're, sure, your ego could be very ignorant and say, oh yeah, they're repressing, whatever. That's a bit psychotic then, but in that moment, right, you're open, there's an opening where you're like, oh, actually there's some dust I need to clean up, kind of thing. And then from there, that could prompt you to look deeper and go deeper into, okay, what's the eternal struggle of love like? What has it always been like for everyone in the sort of, as humanity, the eternal state of struggling with love in humanity, kind of thing. And so you go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And so in that way, individuation, in my opinion, cannot be triggered by yourself necessarily. It can be initiated by yourself, and you need a certain openness, but you need other people and you need encounters with the environment. This "I don't love you" kind of statement could be made by a certain place you revisit. You have this fascinational dream of a place that you've always visited in your childhood, and that sort of keeps you as part of your ego. It keeps you going over time because you're always dreaming back to go back to it, right? Like a romantic longing back to this impossible, beautiful place of antiquity, which is your childhood and so on. And then you go back there and it's actually a dump kind of thing, right? Not that bad, but it's not that pretty, right? Just because the grandeur of it has escaped over time as you've grown older. And so that precise rupture can also thus be caused by a place. And so I think here it's very important to recognize that although Jung's venture was an introverted one, because he also was an introverted type, arguably, the actual venture of individuation is both. It's introverted and extroverted. Because again, like you have to find this melting of the functions, right? Like Jung, like the whole notion of individuation is the balancing of the opposite poles of the archetype and so on. And so you have to meld these opposites together. And that can only happen when you meld those functions together, extroversion, introversion, and so on. Always keep that in mind. And so I think in all, I think that the notion of clean up your room is quite deep, it's quite interesting. And it's quite intricate, actually. And it is a deeply Jungian notion, although it's simplified. But, well, anyways. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you do enjoy it, please consider hit subscribe and like this video and recommend it to your friends and family. Thank you very much for watching, and see you next time.